we've already been talking about graphics 2.0 here.
Okay.
So give us kind of the overview. Give us the the HQ insight into what's going on there.
Sure, sure. Well, it's Graphics 2.0 is our new graphics engine. We think it's something pretty special. We've really worked hard to really embrace a lot of the full power of the hardware that's now available. I think when we wrote the first Corona graphics engine 5 years ago, the availability of OpenGL ES 1.0 was this new thing on iPhone and on the Android devices. So we really created a whole pipeline around that. It's known as a fixed function pipeline, but you weren't able to do some really amazing things. So now we've decided to write a new engine that really embraces the full power of these OpenGL ES 2.0 devices. That's the whole shader-based pipeline that's now available. And we really kind of took a step back. We said, hey, let's try to preserve all the great things we love about the old Corona engine and the APIs and the great graphics model that's really easy, but how do we kind of extend it to take full advantage of all these features? And so when we looked at it, we're like, hey, actually, you know, and we kind of took a step back, and I also just took a step back and said, well, back from my Adobe days, I've always wanted to create a graphics engine that could, combine the things that you could do in Illustrator with the things you could do in Photoshop, with the things that you could do in After Effects. And I always say, I was like, why do these have to be separate products? I actually do remember that, asking myself that question. Working on the Illustrator team, I was like, I really wish you could do some of these Photoshop things in Illustrator and things like that. So when we started designing this new graphics engine, we're like, how do we design it so that it does give us that flexibility moving forward? How do we do it so that we can start thinking about taking some of these cool things, like all these cool vector shapes, and being able to plug in, Photoshop-like raster effects in them without really having to worry about one thing is vector and one thing is raster, and it's not. Whereas like in Photoshop and Illustrator, you're going between the products. So we really try to create a pipeline that really enabled that. So for example, today you can, create shapes, you can set fills on them, and then you can apply filter effects on them. You can do whatever you want on those filter effects. And the goal is whatever generates, we call them paints. Whatever generates fills in a shape could be anything. It could be an image. It could be eventually it's going to be a movie. We showed an experiment where it was from a camera. But the idea is that it's anything. And then, the question is, well, they should be treated like they're all the same thing. So if I want to apply a sepia filter effect on an image file, it should be no different from doing it on something that comes from a camera or something that comes from a movie file. So that's kind of the idea, is that being able to layer these things on top so that there's that they all interoperate in a seamless way. I think that's just been one of our goals. So hopefully that's sort of hopefully people who if you've been playing with graphics tool, you've sort of seen that. Obviously we're not we still have a long ways to go in terms of building other things to enable you to do some things I talk about, but that's the direction we want to go.
Okay.
So,
So right now it's in what? It's in public beta?
yeah, well, it's public beta in the sense that any subscriber has public access to it. It's not public in the sense that anyone can get it, but if you're a subscriber in the community, with Pro or higher, you will have access to it, and you can play with it. So we just released the beta, and so what we have now are special daily builds for Graphics 2.0. So as more bug reports come in, we're fixing them in lockstep as quickly as we can. We're really trying to basically polish this as quickly as we can, so it is the next public release. And that has meant that we had to draw a line between what features we're going to stop working on now, just so we can polish what we have, and on features that we'll work on later in adding. But yeah, right now we're focused on just kind of polishing, and basically trying to make what we have really, really complete.
Okay. Well, so why? What was the rationale between going with like a private beta and just opening it up to the, like you say, the subscribers and stuff like that?
Well, that was driven by this notion that at some point you want to get feedback, but you don't want to, but you also want to have more freedom to change things. Obviously, now in the beta, we're still going to maybe change a few things here and there. But if you have too large a group and you're changing things left and right, no one will want to use it. They're like, oh. But there are a few people who are crazy enough, or thankfully they are crazy enough to be willing to put up with the fact that we're changing things a lot. And so that's why we decided, let's see who's interested, and we'll just open up to those guys. And thankfully there are a good number of people that were willing to play with it and give feedback. And so I really enjoyed interacting with them on the forums. And getting their feedback and seeing some amazing things they were actually able to do even back then. And so that was kind of a really good process for us to kind of bake ideas, see if they play out, and really kind of get things to a higher level of maturity than they were. Also, I think back then, I think we hadn't really done a significant amount of testing on iOS or Android, and so it was definitely a little bit too early to really get out there.
Okay. So I read somewhere about system requirements in order to run Graphics 2.0. Is there a minimum?
Sorry, I'm trying to bring up your screen. Is that?
Well, I don't have it on the screen there.
Oh. So system requirements. Certainly the device has to support OpenGL ES2 to run it on the device. So that's certainly a system requirement. On Macintosh and Windows, generally we're saying more recent hardware it should work fine. Older hardware, your mileage may vary just because in some cases the graphics hardware on this device is actually more powerful than your desktop, ironically. And so yeah, you won't if the device does not support OpenGL ES2, you won't be able to run it essentially. But the reason we waited this long is because we waited to see that most devices do have OpenGL ES2, and I'm not aware of any new devices that are coming out that support OpenGL ES1 only and don't support OpenGL ES2. I think pretty much all new devices now support OpenGL ES2.
Okay. Yeah, I thought that was worth bringing up. I mean,
Yeah.
I think you covered that in your blog post last week.
Yeah. I think Jay is asking about whether Graphics 2.0 will only be available for Pro when released, and so I guess what I've tried to explain, and hopefully this makes sense, is all the cool new features that you have access to in Graphics 2.0. Most of them will be made available only to Pro or higher. But certainly the subset of features that you had available in Graphics 1.0 would be available to you as a starter. And then maybe we would open up a few things that make sense to starters as well. We haven't fully figured all that list out, but pretty much all the cool new things you want to be doing, you're probably going to need Pro to do if you want to use them in Graphics 2.0.
Okay. I know that Eric asked this question earlier. He said, will there be pixel placement control?
So I've actually been talking to a few people offline about that. So because I think some of them have come from a background where they're used to, the days when you would directly draw and touch pixels on the frame buffer itself. And I've been talking to try to understand what are the techniques they're trying to do, because accessing pixels directly can be really slow. So what we're commonly doing is saying you should be able to read pixels off the object directly, because that certainly is going to be useful for a variety of different things like color pickers and things like that. But being able to set pixels on a particular texture can be extremely slow. So what we'd like to understand is what are the visual effects that you're trying to achieve when setting those pixels, because it may make more sense to do them via shaders or offer hooks that are more performant, just because the balancing act between doing things on the CPU versus GPU can get quite hairy. But directly accessing pixels, especially across Lua, may be slow for multiple reasons. First, it's across the Lua bridge as opposed to being done in C. And then with the higher prevalence of Retina displays, you're going to hit a 4x pixel penalty just because with Retina displays, you're dealing with 4 times as many pixels. So doing that on top of doing it in Lua could be really slow. And so we'd like to understand exactly what it is people are trying to do and see if there's another way to do it that's more performant. Just because I think being a lot of people set pixels it could be pretty expensive and impact performance in a negative way, and it's pretty subtle how it impacts performance.
Okay. So Eric, are you good there? All right, they've got a thumbs up. Awesome.
Yeah. So Eric, drop me a line offline and tell me what is it. So like one guy, for example, is telling me, hey, back in the days of when pre-GPU, like the old console days, like Super NES, they did all sorts of different tricks directly on the frame buffer that don't necessarily. It may not make sense to do it exactly that way in a GPU-based pipeline, but that the trick itself might be interesting, and there might be a way to accomplish translate that technique to the GPU. And so what we're trying to do is figure out how do we translate those techniques that are appropriate to a shader-based pipeline.
Okay. So as people are, people are going to have an existing 1.0 code base, and then they're going to want to move to the graphics 2.0 engine. What's the migration process for that? I mean, what are they up against as far as that's concerned?
Yeah, so we've created a graphics compatibility mode that you can add to config.lua. You set basically graphics compatibility equals 1, and what that means is all the APIs will behave as close as possible to the 1.0 thing. I think there may be a few minor changes, but like the sprite library is no longer available because we've deprecated that in favor of display.newsprite. But yeah, certainly we tried to minimize the amount of effort. I think people who use graphics 2.0 are realizing, oh, the alignment of objects, the XY parameters that I pass in display new image are changed. The color channel ranges changed from 0 to 255 to 0 to 1. And I know some people were surprised by that, but if you think about where the future is, it's in terms of a high dynamic range with imaging and things like that, and the fact that even the GPUs themselves deal with a full floating point color range. We tried to make a few changes that kind of moved in that direction. But with graphics compatibility mode, those concerns sort of go away. You can kind of keep your own code and not have to worry about that. And things that are available in 1.0, like set reference points, will continue to be available in a 1.0 compatibility mode. But you have to, if you want to use them if you want to migrate to 2.0 kid, you have to migrate to newer concepts like anchor points.
So let me ask this question, and I haven't thought to ask this before, but is it possible to put in the graphics 1.0 compatibility configuration setting and then use a mixture? Can you use graphics 2.0 stuff in your code, and then it'll pick it out and figure out what's going on?
I was hoping Noah would catch on to that, but yeah.
Oh, awesome! I'm glad I did. I win.
Yeah, I think technically you can, but we don't recommend it.
Okay, so a mixed mode.
Partially because we're not going to be doing any testing there.
Okay.
Or we'll probably be doing very minimal testing, and that'll be low on a totem pole of things we need to fix, because our goal is to, if you have a critical, our goal is to enable you to migrate your code easily, to run your existing code in our new engine easily, and that's what graphics compatibility mode is designed for. And then, obviously, we prefer and we focused on you working on your new, fresh 2.0 based design.
Okay.
Yeah. But I don't think it'd be odd if there were bugs, but I'm just giving you the usual like fine print that, well, if there were bugs, probably
mileage.
Yeah, but I don't see a reason why they would be, because there's only a few places where we're changing the code to basically check the compatibility mode. There may be some weirdness in. No, I don't know. I actually don't know why there'd be. Well, I don't know. I can't comment, actually.
Yeah,
I got a demo running on the screen here in compatibility mode using 2.0 features, and it's clearly I'm only using a small subset, but it seems
yeah,
fine.
Well, I don't see a reason why they would not work, so I guess they should work, but
Right.
Maybe anchor points?
There would be funniness if you try to use anchor points and set reference points simultaneously and try to do something funny. I think then you're going to hit some problems.
Yeah. I'm just thinking of all those.
Just because reference points in the 2.0 engine actually use anchor points under the hood.
Yeah.
In a different way. We had some special path for it to do something special.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of those people who might say, oh, look, what, this game runs under V1, and maybe we don't have that much of a. We want to make a few revisions or whatnot. We want to play with it or whatever, but we're not going to rewrite the whole thing in 2.0. If that would be possible. So it sounds like it might be possible, but tread at your own peril, sort of thing. So
right.
Okay, well that's I think that's fair enough. As people have feedback on this type of stuff, where can they leave their feedback?
Well, we have a graphics 2.0 forum that I mentioned in the blog post. So they have feedback on, they want to talk about, how to use something or features. Definitely let us know. We've been asking people if they have bugs to send us a project, just so that we can prioritize them against other bugs that we're working on. and they can just basically click to report a bug at the top. There's a bar at the top that usually appears when they need to do that, and then and send us a project. Go ahead and send us a project because a lot of times people will put like, oh, here's a code snippet, and we won't have the image they're using, and we're like, oh, what do we do now? And we waste a lot of time there. So in the interest of us trying to fix as many bugs as possible, we're just trying to minimize that kind of churn, but also make sure that we prioritize them. But usually we're pretty friendly about it. So.
Okay. Well, hey, I'm going to open it up here in a minute to anyone who has questions, but first I wanted to make sure we cover the game contest.
Yeah, so we think of it more as not as just a demo contest. We're going to post a blog post with more details about this, but the general idea is, we're looking for cool visual effects that you produce with the new engine, and so we're building a contest around what are kind of cool visual effects that you can produce. Whether and we're not saying like a full-fledged game, but maybe like maybe it's a scene from a game or a particular element in the game that's really cool. Like an example with this one is what Charles put on the screen is one of the guys did a demo where he applied a zoom blur in the context of his game, and I was like, well, that's kind of cool. So there are different kinds of things there, and we're probably going to be looking both in the context of games and non-games. So games, the non-games meaning could be utility or a business app that has a cool visual element that you want to show off using features in Graphics 2.0. So that's kind of the general guideline. I think we'll have more details about how to provide your demo and things like that. But that's the general guideline. So we'll be doing a post later this week on that.
Okay.
But that's the general idea, and to entice you to do special things, we're going to have prizes like not just subscriptions, but also devices. Hopefully that will make you kind of excited about the kinds of different prizes. Because I think everyone always gets excited about hardware and having something physical in their hands. So there you go.
Any Ouya stuff?
Maybe that could be one. If you guys have ideas afterwards, drop me a line of things you think would make as cool prizes, and we will take that under consideration.
Yeah, definitely send in recommendations.
Jen's like trip to Hawaii.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm talking about. See, I think we should
have. All right.
we have there's a couple of ambassadors there in Hawaii. I think we should have a meetup there.
Oh, that's true. It's true.
All right. Well, excellent. Well, okay. I'm going to open it up. Does anybody have any questions? I mean, take yourself off of mute, and if you have something you want to ask.
Yeah, I'm sorry I was really late. I know some people had to leave, but I'm really sorry I was so late. But hopefully, please, any questions?
I got a question if anybody doesn't want to go first.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, anchor points. So
Yeah.
I don't want to do a retraction next week. I don't want you to watch the show later, the beginning part, and go, no, Ed, that's all wrong. So on anchor points, can you give us like a summary of the reason why you chose to go with anchor points instead of retaining the original reference points?
So anchor points, the whole idea behind anchor points is to really give you full flexibility on aligning an object relative to its position. I think reference points were sort of broken in certain situations, or at least perceived to be, but they were just problems, I think. Anchor points give you kind of full flexibility, so you can basically, you can do the same things you do with a reference point. You can align things based on the center or top left or bottom right or middle top or whatever, but you can do anything in between actually. And I think part of what was confusing with reference points was there's a notion of there's kind of two different origins. One was the origin for the position of the object, and one was like the position you rotate the object about. I think with anchor points, it's going to be a lot easier, for example, in a business application to align an object, like left align 3 buttons by saying, okay, set the anchor points, anchor X to 0 on all 3 buttons, and they'll all be left aligned. And I don't think you can really do that with reference points very easily. You still have to kind of calculate, half widths and translate them by additional half widths.
Right.
And anchor points, it really makes it a lot easier. So that was part of the goal too, was to really just clean up some of the cruft from the 1.0 engine that I think people always had trouble wrapping their heads around.
Sure, yeah. Especially when it got into rotations.
Yeah, it was a little bit awkward. So we want to kind of say let's just define some new rules that kind of make more sense. And I think in order to produce sort of more kind of so-called responsive interfaces, I think anchor points is going to really help a lot. Because of the way you plug things.
Sorry, talked over you there. Would it be fair to say that anchor points were also driven by the 2.5D?
I hadn't actually thought of that. But I suppose, yeah, that would make things interesting there as well. I hadn't thought about that.
Because I originally said that I thought it was driven by that, because I'd seen another engine, whose name I won't mention, who added 2.5D, and they also ran into a kind of a similar situation where they had to add an anchor point-like concept to allow for it.
Oh, interesting. I wasn't aware of that. I guess it's a happy accident if it helps make things easier there.
We like happy accidents.
Yeah.
It's better than figuring it out later and saying, that doesn't work.
All right, does anybody else have any questions? I see Greg is doing pictures with friends or draw with friends over there. You should have been here last week, Walter. He was drawing all kind of stuff. It's crazy.
It was extremely wrong stuff, but he was drawing.
Was it rated G or rated non-G?
No, it's G. It's always G. The guy's doing children's books. It's always G.
Oh, okay.
All right. Well.
So transitions.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
We just saw like transitions and filters. I think he did a little demo quickly of it.
Yeah, I did.
And it looked really interesting because you could like take from one setting of the filter and change it with the transition.
Yeah, we really worked hard to make the filters have kind of nice property-style access, so it's easy to change the parameters. And one thing that we haven't mentioned is, how do you? We're also we haven't documented this yet, but we're also going to be as soon as the guy writes the sample code, showing how you can kind of compose sequences of filter effects together in these what we call shader graphs or effect graphs. So you could do chain so for example the bloom filter that we have available to you is actually a sequence of more basic filters. It's a sequence of applying a levels followed by a blur and then followed by a composite add. And so you'll be able to do that as well to kind of create kind of an infinite variety of your own shader effects.
Yeah, I really like that, especially since resolutions are getting higher. It's almost like you need the code to stretch your graphics further.
Yeah,
I really like that.
And so we thought that was a great way for people to really experiment with shader effects, is being able to really kind of compose graphs together in a simple way.
Yeah.
I think one other thing that we haven't really gotten into in my blog posts is we worked hard to make sure that our effects are aware of retina imaging and content scaling. I think we're probably the only ones who are doing this actually. So that if you have, for example, there's an effect called the stripes generator or marching ants or even like pixelate. Those will kind of be consistent relative to your content size and retina imaging. At least that's the goal. I guess you should tell us if it's not, but
right.
The goal is that if you specify in pixelate number of pixels and then you run your app on different screen sizes and shapes, the relative relationship between that pixelation and the size of your quote unquote content screen should be the same across devices.
That's nice.
Yeah.
So
it's going to take that aspect ratio into effect now.
Right. So it's taking effect let's say you pixelate it such that in your content your pixelation is so high that you have 4 pixels, 4 square blocks across. The pixel filter is dialed up so high that it looks super pixelated. It should look the same on an iPad Retina as it does on an iPhone.
That's amazing.
You can see 4, right? across.
Yeah, 4. That's great. I'm excited. I can't wait to do this contest. So it's just got to put some graphics together and make a little demo. Sounds
Yeah.
like
So
the demo scene, Dave.
we'll have to talk about how to do these shader graphs before we announce the contest, just so you guys can play with that feature as well. So you have lots of different things to play with.
I think putting more Photoshop like sensibility into it's going to be a big draw too. Because a lot of people understand layers.
We already have over 80 filters,
wow.
and I believe we've tested most of them on the Mac. I know maybe a few of them may not work on Windows, and most of them work on iOS, and I think Android is probably the least well tested. But I think there's still a good number that work on Android as well.
That's exciting.
Yeah. And obviously, we're going to be publishing new daily builds to fix those in days to come. So, but you know, the contest, what we're looking for, we're trying to figure out what is the right best criteria, because we don't want to steer people in one direction or one narrow direction or another. We want to kind of leave it open-ended, be like, well, we're looking for just cool things that people are able to achieve with the new engine, whether it's with filter effects or 2.5D or even containers and snapshots or there are all sorts of features, even with anchor points. We have no idea. Like, we don't know what people are going to come up with, and we don't want to kind of we don't want to pre-inceptionize anyone in any particular direction.
Pre-inceptionize. Wow.
Yeah,
it makes a lot of sense. Like if someone made something in 3D, then everyone would think, oh, it's a 3D.
Right. So we don't want to say, oh, we're looking for this, right? We just want to say, hey, what is the cool demo?
Variety.
So I think, you know, the one thing we're thinking of is, like, we'd love to. The goal of we'd like to be able to say, hey, imagine you were to do a 5-second video demo or 6-second demo of this thing, you know, what would you do in that 6 seconds? Maybe that's one way of explaining it, right?
Yeah, that's a great way of explaining it. I think a lot of times images come out too soon and people think, oh, well, that's what it's going to be.
Right.
And having a contest can get a lot of people like interested. But the only reason I was asking about pixel perfect graphics is the programming of raycasters. The programming of raycasters doesn't really make sense to me on the new level hardware. So a lot of people, you know, think that, oh, I'll be able to program a raycaster on it. Like, you know, raycaster would be like Doom or Wolfenstein or something, where you need pixel precision changing of images based on a camera. But there's no really reason to do that, I don't think, anymore. And so that's what I mean by, like, are you going to have, like, a lot of high-res image support and stuff? Because just because I did one game in pixels doesn't mean I think all games should be like the old 8-bit format. You know, I think that there's a lot that can be brought to this new graphics engine that people aren't expecting to be like, you know, a retro Mode 7 or something. Right. And that's all I'm saying. Right. Because everyone knows me for the Quest Lord pixel graphics and stuff. I think you can do a lot more with that, especially after seeing that little transition demo. It's fantastic.
Cool. Thanks.